tell us about the wildlife conflict in India. We have Dr. Mayukh Chatterjee, who has experience in working in this area of inclusive conservation for more than 10 years with Wildlife Trust of India. Now he is moved to UK and he is associated with Chester Zoo.
Oh yeah, so I've been working in the field of human wildlife conflict mitigation for quite a few years now, trying to develop projects on the ground, in order to sort of have long-term impacts on the ground to mitigate conflicts. Conflict can have multiple levels. So it could begin with certain number of incidents, certain frequency of incidents that keep occurring, and then if those incidents are not manageable, whether it's by people or whether it's by external agencies, the conflict grows deeper and deeper. So there are studies now, extensive case studies from across the world that have been collated, and people are talking about this, that once you go very deep into the conflict situation and it becomes a sort of an identity conflict, it becomes very hard to really address. With respect to India, why it is so special is that why this whole thing about human wildlife conflicts is very special. India has some of the hottest of hotspots of human wildlife conflict with respect to many species. But despite that, and despite the constraint of space that we have, because we are a large population, and it's not just India, it's also the neighboring countries of Nepal, Bangladesh. So all these 3-4 countries in Southeast Asia, we're very unique in a sense, because despite the constraint of space, because of an overbearing human population, which again has led to high levels of conflict, we still are a group of countries who have a very preservationist approach. We still people of these countries still, despite the high levels of conflict in some places, they've not gone completely agonistic or apathic towards wildlife. They still want wildlife, and they still have the whole live and let live in their ethos, in their culture, really. And therefore it's very these countries present a very very stark examples of coexistence rather than human wildlife conflict, the way I see. People who've been working in this field have been also seeing is that the sense of coexistence is gradually eroding in a number of places. And although most people still would not readily shoot an elephant or tiger or any animal that they would see in their backyard in India or Nepal or near the neighboring country, this is gradually eroding. And we are seeing the tides tilt against wildlife species in some places. And these particular signs are worrying, because it's telling us that the existing tolerance that's prevalent in this entire landscape, which is extremely unique, is disappearing very fast. And therefore, a lot of attention needs to be paid in order to sustain that over time. Yeah. Situations where a conflict has been persistent over time and has not been managed or has not been addressed proactively, in those regions the resentment is growing, and therefore you see the fallout of that resentment, where there are increasing levels of retaliatory killings of animals. So in many parts of India, we are witnessing tigers getting snared, the use of jaw traps. There's a poisoning, there's electrocution. It's the same with elephants as well. In many places, people are taking more and more aggressive measures to deal with individual situations. So these are the signs of erosion of the tolerance that in India, Nepal, and all these South Asian sister countries were a hallmark of. And that, I think, is very, very worrying. Because when that tolerance erodes away, you get what you see today in many other parts of the world. For example, many European countries, people don't want a single wolf within even 1,000 square kilometers. It's that level of intolerance that's already grown. And now in a place like India, it's just the tolerance that's allowed the wildlife to thrive. And if that goes away, you wouldn't have you would basically see a downfall of a lot of populations of wildlife species. And therefore, human wildlife conflict management and mitigation takes prime importance in countries like India or Nepal or Bangladesh. Because if you do not manage it now proactively, things are start going to it's going to impact wildlife conservation big time. Yeah. Major issues with respect to management of conflicts, especially with large mammals which includes large carnivores, is the lack of two things. One is education, the other is inclusivity. Now, the problem in countries like India, what has happened is the historical conservation approach itself has been very exclusionary. It has time and again, and even now in many places, the approach is very, very top down. So it excludes people, or it will involve people in a very superficial way, which is like, okay, the world is telling me that I have to involve people, so okay, so I have some meetings with people and do some bit of paperwork. But that's not what we're talking about. What we need is a very, very inclusive approach where the people, as you rightly said, are the ones who are facing the problem. And then solutions need to be co-developed and co-planned and co-developed, and I would even go on to say co-implemented. And when you brought up the story of Manas, that is what Wildlife Trust of India and Justice began doing. That when we started the work, the very first step of the work was to go around villages. We spent almost a year going around villages, talking to people, asking them what they would like to be done, why they think the solution they are thinking is right, why do they think that it is right, why do they think that it will work, how do they think they're going to resolve a crisis with that solution. So suppose that solution is put into play and it falters somehow, what are they going to do? So that those kinds of discussions ensued for almost a year. And it's only after that, and it's also not just like unaccounted talk. We also collected a lot of data from those discussions. We put that together. We figured out what people seem to be talking about. Then we took it back to the people and said, okay, this is what it seems. So these are the solutions you seem to be talking about. And so now, how do you want to start working on it? And even the process of implementation came from the people. So when it comes from the people, instead of a top-down approach, it becomes a bottoms-up approach. What happens is a very simple thing. It just ensures that people agree to it from their hearts. So there's a huge buy-in to the solution, right? And when you have local buy-in, what happens is when you walk away, it still continues. And the biggest example of that is during the COVID pandemic, when our teams had to be withdrawn from Manas. Nobody was really there. And there was this huge long fence that people themselves had constructed, but we were still apprehensive. What if they fail in maintaining it? What if an elephant breaks it? Who's going to repair it? Will they be able to repair it? All of that. And all our fears were put aside when we started seeing that people are going on regular patrols, they are maintaining the fence, they are doing everything. And why was that happening? It's simply because all we did was we gave them the expertise and they implemented it, right? So they came up with a solution, we put our expertise, and they implemented the solution ultimately, and they upkeep everything. And so that really helps. And I think cases like this should be replicated everywhere, and it is being. It's not that Manas is the only story. There's some wonderful case study from Sanjay Gandhi National Park, by Vidya Treya and her team. It's a huge team. The forest departments played a role. Media people have played a huge role. So when concerted efforts are made by different stakeholders. And there is huge level of inclusivity, co-planning, co-development, you will see signs of success. In fact, that's what the other point was when I spoke about two issues. One was inclusivity, the other was education. You see, Susan, the problem is in terms of education, there are many indigenous communities who've lived for eons with wildlife, and they've lived amidst nature. So they've accumulated a huge amount of traditional knowledge. They know how to deal with it. But unfortunately, a large section of the Indian society does not, right? So, for example, if you take Dudhwa Pilibhit, where we are working with Wildlife Trust of India, a large section of that society are migrants post-independence. Yeah? So they do not have that accumulated traditional knowledge in their culture, which tells them how to deal with tigers or leopards. Right? Consequently, what you see, you basically see them, getting very alarmed, yeah, not knowing how to behave when they're going into a forest, how to avoid encounters, and you end up seeing a lot of these aggressive incidents where people end up hurting themselves and the animals. Sometimes the animals die, sometimes some people die in the skirmish as well. So that education is wherever it's lacking, it's very necessary for it to be imparted, and for people to be made to understand that why something is being conserved. And even what I feel is even more than just the why, I think something that needs to be imparted is, what is their role in safeguarding that, and what are the benefits that they reap. So, for example, if you talk to any community person who's living beside a nice lush green forest, if you can make the person see the benefits the person is reaping at the end of the day from being beside a lush green forest, the person then, you're helping the person outweigh the cost with the benefits. So that also is education. When you start talking to people about the benefits they reap vis-a-vis the costs, right? So it's like, it's, for example, if you take the analogy of roads, like we all have highways and roads, and we've got speeding cars, people die, you do have accidents, but we still want roads, right? Why do we want roads? Because obviously the benefits will outweigh the costs, right? And so you can put certain processes in place to minimize accidents, to minimize car crashes and people dying and people getting injured, but you still want roads, right? That's why you would put those it's pretty much the same thing with conflict. So there are solutions. You can actually bring in processes that can minimize damages from conflict, and therefore you can continue to coexist.